The GTX 1060 6GB, the former king of the Steam hardware survey charts, but can this dethroned ruler claim back some of its former glory in 2024? Let's find out. So, the GTX 1060 6GB was released all the way back in 2016 for an MSRP of $299. Today though, the story is a little bit different, with prices on eBay being between that £60 to £90 range here in the UK and around $60 to, again, the $90 range in the US. But is the price to performance worth it in 2024? As I mean, it's still holding on to third spot on the Steam hardware survey charts. And so let's put it to the test. So in my system today we have a Ryzen 7 5700X from AMD. We also then have 32GB of DDR4 3600MHz speed RAM. And of course our little 1060 6GB card. Starting off with Starfield then, at 1080p along with every other game that we're going to be looking at today, we were at the low settings with FSR enabled, and that got us an average of 35 FPS with a 1% low of 4 and a 0.1% low of 2. Also, I'll show you a comparison between film grain on and film grain off, and yeah, in my opinion it makes a massive difference. I turned it off. And I'm not sure why the film grain was so grainy. It seemed a bit ridiculous to have it on the max. But yeah, turning it off improved the clarity quite a bit. Next up then was Far Cry 6 on the Ultra settings then, with no HD texture pack enabled, because that is a texture pack you can put on for graphics cards with more than 11GB of VRAM. And we were looking at an average of 47 FPS with a 1% low of 30 and a 0.1% low of 12. Just to note, turning this down to the high setting did provide a much smoother experience with the 0.1 and 1% lows. With the high setting, you were looking at an average of 57 FPS with a 1% low of 44 and a 0.1% low of 33. In Cyberpunk 2077, with the low settings with crowd density on medium and no upscaling, we saw an average frame rate of 43 with a 1% low of 31 and a 0.1% low of 30. I did try increasing this to medium, but then going in the game and driving about, it was clear that it would drop below 30 at certain points. Next up we have F1 23 with an average frame rate of 125, a 1% low of 99 and a 0.1% low of 60. And yeah, I was quite impressed with this as well. Even on the low settings, it looks actually really good, F1 23. And you could play on medium and potentially high if you wanted more visual fidelity. In the finals then, at the low preset with no upscaling as well, we saw an average of 77 FPS with a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 41. And again, this was a pretty good game, felt quite smooth. You could potentially pull it up to medium, but in a competitive game like this, it's just best to stay on the low preset. Hogwarts Legacy up next then, and this one surprised me a fair bit. On the low preset, we got an average of 47 FPS with a 1% low of 32.5 and a 0.1% of 6.6. The low 0.1% lows, I'm going to guess, is when the world is loading, when you're trying to go through a door through Hogwarts and the outside world. It handled Hogsmeade really well, which is a really known hard area to run. And yeah, overall I did try bumping up to medium, but when you went out in the larger world, it did go below 30 FPS, so low it is for this one. And I also think the 32GB of RAM greatly helped it out, as if you've seen a video that I did a few weeks ago comparing 16GB versus 32, you get a fairly big frame boost with 32GB of RAM in this title. Again, I was fairly happy with how this card had performed with no upscaling in these titles. So to continue the trend, in Call of Duty Modern Warfare Warzone 3, we saw an average of 54 FPS with a 1% low of 29 and a 0.1% low of 12, with the minimum preset to try get us the most frames possible. In Elden Ring, I may have kept dying, but nonetheless, we still got an average frame rate of 57 and a 1% low of 40 with a 0.1% low of 4. This was also on the medium preset. Finally, in Palworld, which is a title which is recently released and is in early access, with the medium preset, we saw an average of 44 FPS with 1% lows of 33 and a 0.1% low of 7. Now that we're done with the benchmarks, what did you think of the little guy? I was actually fairly impressed, to be fair. It only really stumbled on Starfield, really, and the rest of the games, it pretty much did fine with no upscaling involved at all. So to be honest, for the price, if you're looking for a cheap first build or an emergency graphics card, and that's the cheapest one you can find online, I think it's a decent little proposition. But let me know what you thought about it, and if you are new to the channel and you did like this video, maybe consider leaving it a like and subscribing. It would greatly help me and the channel out. But that's going to be all from me. Bye!